You know, one of the things that's interesting, particularly with the information that's been coming out recently, is the fact that there are historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists that are saying that the interpretations of the ancient world cannot really be defined because there's a lack of continuity as it relates to the peoples and the places, the events, and the things that have taken place. And the reason why that is, and it's quite simply because these different scholars do not want to get into the reality that, as Dr. John Henrik Clarke often taught us, the missing pages of world history is African history. And so it becomes important that if you want a true interpretation of the culture, of the people and the places, there is no way that you can leave Africa out. But because of the sociological conditions of always attempting to make it seem as if African peoples are inferior, primitive, that they have not contributed anything to civilization, because they lack that ability or desire to, we never get the proper cultural interpretations. And so the work that we're doing is meant to look at the world before the European began to write the history books. And to truly understand the Moors, you have to go before the people that we call the Moors. We're dealing with episodic history, and we're dealing with holistic history. The episodic history takes episodes, such as the West African kingdoms that people give credit to: the Ghana Empire, the Malinke Empire, the Songhai Empire. When you look at Egypt, they go from the first dynasty and on. And when you're dealing with the Moors, they tend to look at 710, when it was reconnoitered by Tarif, one of the lieutenants of the African general Tariq, that went in to reconnoiter the southern part of Europe, specifically Spain. And then 711, July of 711 to be exact, Tariq and his African warriors and some Arab translators crossed over into Spain and began their conquest of this area. This was a preemptive strike.
Having assured himself of the necessary command of the sea, Musa sent the Berber Tariq, one of his freedmen, to possess himself of Tangiers and the strong places of the neighbouring districts with a view to crossing over into Spain. Tariq accordingly marched thither and took the strong places and cities of those Berbers. This being done, Tariq wrote to his master, "Musa, I have found here 6 vessels." Musa told him to take them and to sail for Spain. Tariq did so in the year 710 and was joined by Musa himself in the year 711. The conquest took place at the beginning of the 8th century and was for all ordinary purposes complete. It was carried out almost entirely by Berber troops, whom Musa continued to convert, to organise and to draft into Spain. Tangiers, which had always been a Berber stronghold, became for this purpose his military headquarters, and he was enabled perpetually to recruit his conquering armies with fresh troops. Tariq took 12,000 of these converts with him on his first landing. There was a tradition lingering from the Greek occupation of the country that Spain would be conquered only by 2 nations composed of peoples unaccustomed to the luxuries of life, hardened by privation and fatigue. The Arabs and the Andalusians alike translated the prophecy to apply to the Arabs and the Berbers. Shortly after the whole of Spain was reduced, there was a general Arab migration to it, and it was with this Arab migration that the high civilization came. For about 50 years, the Berbers in fitful revolution struggled against the Arabs for the sole possession of a country which they claimed that they and they alone had won. The conflict between the dynasties of the Umayyad and the Abbasid in the east gave opportunities for the disaffected in Spain. But about the middle of the 8th century, when the Abbasids succeeded in overthrowing the dynasty of the Umayyad in the east and possessing themselves of the caliphate, one son of the Umayyad escaped into North Africa and, after many adventures, established himself under the name of Abd al-Rahman, the first upon the throne of his fathers in Spain. He ascended the throne in 757, thus separating the Caliphate of the East from the Caliphate of the West, and brilliantly opened the chapter of cultivated Arab rule in the West. During the first 2 centuries of the rule of the Umayyad, the Arab dominion in Spain reached its highest point. The court of Abd al-Rahman and his successors became the centre of all the art, the learning, the refinement, and the elegance of the known world. Commerce brought to the shores of Spain the best productions of every land. Science was honoured. Arab travellers penetrated to the furthest limits of the Eastern Hemisphere. All that India and China had to teach was known to them. Medieval Arabian achievements in the higher paths of learning are well known. There is no branch of scientific development among the Western nations upon which the Arabs have not set their mark, either by original research or by the service which they rendered in transmitting to their European posterity the learning accumulated by other generations in other lands. They initiated the Renaissance in Europe by preserving and translating at a much earlier period the great works of the Greeks. They gave a vivifying impulse to all the intellectual life of the West by introducing to it the hoarded knowledge of the East. In addition to the geometricians, astronomers, geographers, mechanicians, botanists, chemists, physicians, who appear to have collected all that was known in Asia as well as Europe, and who wrote voluminously the works of many of them amounting to 50 and 60 volumes, every branch of literature was represented. There were histories, essays, poems. There were treatises upon arithmetic, grammar, poetry, rhetoric, canon and civil law, jurisprudence, logic. All the arts to which elaborate architecture and luxurious domestic life gave rise were, of course, highly developed. Painting appears to have been restricted chiefly to decorative work, but we are repeatedly told that the palaces of southern Spain were filled with works of art. It is interesting to note that in the great days of Mohammedan Spain, Arabian women were not confined, as in the East, to harems, but appeared freely in public and took their share in all the intellectual, literary and even scientific movements of the day. Women held schools in some of the principal towns. There were women poets, historians and philosophers, as well as women surgeons and doctors. America alone appears to have been unknown to the Arabs, and when we remember that modern Europe had to wait for the journey of Magellan round the world in the opening years of the 16th century to be quite sure of the shape of the globe, we must admit that in the learning of the Arabs of Spain, Negroland had sources of information far purer than any of which England at that time could boast.